Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We'll be looking at Galatians chapter 1, verses 21, and we'll probably be finishing this chapter in this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of my heart. Now, in verses 21 through 24, according to Acts chapter 9, verses 29 and 30, Paul did not spend a lot of time in Jerusalem because he was chased out. Paul was zealous for the Jewish faith, and he persecuted the church. He wanted to stomp it out. But now Paul knows Christ, he's saved, and Paul now is zealous for Christ and for the gospel. And Paul, being in Jerusalem, preached the gospel, and he was zealous for Christ. And it caused some commotion there in Jerusalem. And it was felt that he needed to leave Jerusalem. And so the apostles and the believers in Jerusalem sent Paul away, and they sent him back to Tarsus, his hometown, which was in the region of Syria and Cilicia. As we see here, verses 21 and 22, afterwards I came into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and was unknown by face unto the churches of Judea, which were in Christ. Here, Paul is saying that he did not spend enough time either in Jerusalem or Judea to be influenced by anyone there. So again, Paul is confirming that his gospel was not influenced by people in Damascus when he came back from Arabia. He didn't go to Jerusalem and spend lots of time there. He just went and saw Peter and James and was there 15 days. And then he said, I wasn't in Jerusalem long enough for anybody to influence me. And he says, they had only heard about me. He says, I was unknown by face unto the churches of Judea, which were in Christ. Okay? And he said, basically, I didn't know them, and they didn't know me. Then he says in verse 23, but they had heard only that he which persecuted us in times past now preaches the faith which once he destroyed. It says here, he heard only. Paul was only known to these people in Judea by what they heard of him, not because they saw him or met him. Okay? So Paul again is confirming to these Galatian believers that Paul never met these people. Paul's gospel wasn't influenced by these believers in Judea. Paul said, they heard about me, but I didn't meet them, and they didn't meet me, so we didn't talk about anything. And he said, he which persecuted us in time past, meaning once upon a time, they had heard that Paul persecuted the church in times past. He said, persecuted us in time past, now preaches the faith. The faith means specifically faith in Christ. It's the faith in the salvation by grace through faith in Christ. Okay? Persecuted the faith which once he destroyed. And destroyed here, the Greek word is portheo, and it's in the imperfect tense. And portheo means to lay waste, to make havoc of. The imperfect tense means that Paul was continuously persecuting and making havoc of the church. So it was an ongoing thing that he which was continuously persecuting the church and trying to destroy the church, the faith in Christ, it says, now he's preaching it. Okay? Now Paul is preaching faith in Christ, the faith that he tried to destroy. And then in verse 24, and they glorified God in me. It says they glorified. Again, this also is in the imperfect tense, meaning they kept on glorifying God because of how God changed Paul's life. Now, this is interesting because have you ever thought that there are people who have glorified God because of the work of God in your life? And maybe it's a little humbling to us, and maybe a little embarrassing, but you go somewhere to a Bible study, or you are asked to give your testimony somewhere, and you give your testimony of how you met Christ and how you got saved and how God opened up your heart and took the veil off of your heart and your mind, and you came to Him and you humbled yourself to God and you got saved. And you know, people will glorify God by your testimony. And this is what Paul is saying, that Paul's saying, the veil was lifted from my heart. I persecuted the church. I wanted to destroy it. But one day God met me and He unveiled my heart and my mind. Now, instead of persecuting the church, now I preach Christ. I preach the gospel of grace through faith. And now, and you know what? These believers everywhere, believers in Damascus, believers in Jerusalem, believers in Judea, even people that have never seen my face, they glorify God, that God did an amazing work in my heart. God is glorified through my testimony, and God is glorified through your testimony. There have been people, you're saved today, there have been people that have glorified God, have thanked God because He touched your heart, because He saved you and He worked in your heart. And you know, God can use our testimony as a means of glorifying Him. Don't be afraid to give your testimony. Don't be embarrassed to share how you met Christ, because it might be the thing that God uses to open up someone else's heart. God, you never know. Listen, you never know what it will take for God to open up someone's heart. You may think, well, this person needs to hear that, or that person needs to hear this, and you have no idea. But you know what? God sees the heart. God knows the person, that unsaved person, and God sees their heart. And God's working on their heart, and God desires that they come to Him, and God can use anything. And don't be afraid to tell your testimony, because it might be the thing, it's a tool in God's hand to open up and to unveil someone's heart and mind, that they humble themselves and come to God. And they'll glorify God because you gave your testimony. They glorify God because you got saved and you told your testimony. That person now was led to Christ and came to Christ and humbled himself. Now somebody will glorify God because they got saved. And they got saved because you got saved. And you got saved because somebody else got saved. And you heard. And that's how it goes. And so it's Paul here says, it's an amazing thing. He says, I persecuted the church. I was a terrible person. But now these people who I've never seen, they've only heard about me. I've heard about them. But they're glorifying God from my life and my testimony. And you know what? That's tremendous. I want God to be glorified in my life. And I know you want God to be glorified in your life too. And to continue to serve Him and walk with Him. Right? Until next lesson, we're going to start chapter 2 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know He walks with you.